exhausted. Draw me nearer, near, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. Oh, the pure delight of a single love, that before thy throne I spend, when I kneel in prayer with thee, my God. I commune as friend with friend. Draw me nearer, near, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, near, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. There are depths of love that I cannot know till I cross the narrow sea. There are heights of joy that I may not reach till I rest in peace with thee. Draw me nearer, near, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, near, blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side.
Excuse me. Apologize for that, my first little dry. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father in heaven, holy is your name. Father, thank you for this wonderful day on earth, and thank you for the opportunity that we have to come here and learn your word. Be with us so we might be able to properly absorb what you've given us in the Bible, and be with the teachers so they might properly give it to us. And Father, please be with everyone on the prayer list, everyone who is ill or people who are misunderstanding your word. And please be with the entire world as we're going through many things right now. And it's in your Son's righteous name we pray. Amen. I find the horse in the water.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone tonight. Certainly glad you are with us. We are in Acts chapter 22. Paul has been detained, for lack of a better word, arrested, if you will, bound up. He's been making a defense for himself as he makes the defense for himself. He talks about his conversion story in several verses here, going through his trip to Damascus, his meeting up with Ananias, Ananias saying, Paul, why do you wait? Rise, be baptized, wash away your sins, calling upon the name of the Lord, verse 16. And so we have them down. We're about verse 20, we're 28, I think. Talking about his citizenship. And so I wanted to kind of back up just one second, take a look at the paper that I gave you. This is a picture of a portion of, if you will, of Jerusalem, two different pictures. Of course, the one in the bottom is copyrighted, so don't make any money on it. But it's the best picture I could get you. Now, if you notice on the top picture on the left is the temple area. On the back side of the temple area, there's like a little area there that's raised up. And then you have the temple of the Gentiles next to that. That's the lower area that you would see there. And so when you're entering the temple area, the temple of the Gentiles is basically the area of the temple that just about anybody can go. The women are allowed there, the Gentiles are allowed there, things like that. But as you get into the higher levels of the temple, less and less people are able to go. Of course, the actual temple itself is where the Ark of the Covenant is, and only the high priest can go into that area, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement. So, but I want to focus your attention on that, almost in that top picture, it looks like a little bridge area. So there's a bigger picture of it right here on the bottom of what that is. And that is a fortress, the Antonia Fortress. And this is where this trial, if you will, is taking place for the Apostle Paul. Now the Sanhedrin is normally the ruling body that rules in this area. The Sanhedrin is the Jewish authorities. Like we would call it, in the United States, we'd call it the Supreme Court. The Sanhedrin is the Jewish Supreme Court. And so we don't know if this is an official meeting of the Sanhedrin or it's just a pop-up type of thing. But some of them are definitely involved in this meeting. Now this area is really interesting because this is the exact same area that someone else was tried. Who do you think else was tried there? Christ. I think the exact same area that Christ was tried. And so, of course, we know all about that trial and how unfair that was. So they've had a history of being a little bit unfair with their trials when they want them to go a certain way. And that's just the way life can be sometimes. So let's finish up chapter 22, again, verse 20. So the commander answered, or verse 27, the commander came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman? And he said, yes. The commander answered, I acquired this citizenship with a large sum of money. And Paul said, but I was actually born a citizen. And so we talked about that in the close of class last Wednesday night, that many people were able to buy their citizenship if they had a very large sum of money. It was for sale. And so you could be a Roman, and being a Roman is kind of like being a U.S. citizen. You have a lot of privileges to be a U.S. citizen. And so many people over the years have wanted to come to this country and be U.S. citizens. Of course, that citizenship has never been sold, but it's been granted to thousands or millions. And so here in Rome, they would let you try to buy it. And of course, the money was just something that has always been in politics, hasn't it? And probably will always be in politics. And so, of course, money is involved there, and large sums of money. And so the commander actually had to buy his. But Paul says, no, I was born a citizen. Verse 29, therefore those who were about to examine him immediately let go of him. And the commander was also afraid when he found out that he was a Roman, because he had put him in chains, but on the next day, wishing to know for certain why he had been accused by the Jews, he released him and ordered the chief priest and the council to the assembly and brought Paul down and set him before them. So he automatically, once he found out he was a Roman citizens have rights. Don't touch him. Let him go. Release him. They became afraid because they were violating his rights. Now, if he was just a Jew, well, that's okay. If he's just a Gentile, well, that's okay. Hang him by his toes, it doesn't matter. But if he's a Roman, well, then that's a whole different ball of wax. They would have to answer to the Roman government. So they released him, but in the back of their mind, as we go into chapter 23, is this thought. Well, what was the uproar all about? Big uproar. What was it all about? Why were they calling for his arrest in the first place? Well, so we see there that in the last verse there of chapter 23, he released him and ordered the chief priest and the council to assemble, brought Paul down and set him before them. So he released him, brought him before this other body, and now he's going to have to answer more questions. In other words, released from the commander, brought before the chief priests and others to answer more questions. Now, before we begin chapter 23, I've got some notes here that I wanted to look at. This area in Jerusalem is special. We have certain areas of our country, we call special, don't we? One area that I have never seen, that someday maybe I'll see, is Mount Rushmore. Maybe you've seen that. It's special. You wouldn't want anybody to, how they have pulled down statues, and you wouldn't want anybody to deface that or anything because it's special. And there's, I think many of us consider the White House and the Capitol and all that special, and we have our due respect for that. But when we begin to chapter 23, we begin to talk about this council and this Jerusalem council. So Jesus was delivering his last public discourse in the temple courts, and near the close he paused and looked around him and its inhabitants, and with a heavy heart he said this. So this is Jesus saying farewell to this city. So I want you to think about this city for a second. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 23, verse 37 and following. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stone those who are sent to hear. Now we're years later, a few years later, and we see them once again getting ready to imprison at this point, or possibly kill. We know that they don't kill him at this point, but kill a man of God. So really what Jesus was looking at when he was looking at the city, he's looking at, and you have to understand where Jesus is coming from here. Jerusalem was the city of what? Who made the, in the beginning, who created? Just as one? God. Jerusalem was the city of God. And, considerably, the city of David, who was said that, or was quoted as a man after God's own heart. So there's deep history in Christianity. How would you feel if the place that you went, if there was a place that you went to find Christianity all your life, had basically taken and turned against that? And so that's Jesus here looking at Jerusalem, and you have to scratch your head. Why did they do this? They did this for a lot of reasons. But he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who killed the prophets, stoned those who were sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wing, but you are unwilling. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so he makes this statement in at the end of Matthew chapter 23. And then if you follow the text into Matthew chapter 24, it begins to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, does anybody, he uses the word desolate. Okay, that's kind of another word for what? Disaster, destruction, those types of things. So when did the destruction of Jerusalem happen? Yeah, 70 AD. And so he's predicting that destruction. And he's not, in the first 32 verses, he's not predicting the end of the world, because you can see, run to a different city, run to a different area. Well, if it's the end of the world, that's not going to help you, is it? Now, later in the chapter, he talks about that. Verse 36 is a pivotal point. But about 1000 BC, King David captured Jerusalem. We look back at Jerusalem history. Now, Jerusalem was a city called, if I can pronounce this right, Jebus. Jebus. Before it became Jerusalem. So that was its original name. So about 1000 BC, way back in the Old Testament time, King David captured that city and made it his capital. He moved the Ark of the Covenant to the city. And if you remember, Solomon had later built the temple there. Jerusalem had become known to the Israelites as the city of God. After the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, now this AD 70 was not the first time Jerusalem was destroyed. 586 BC, it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And it is after Babylon began to come in there and take the Jews out and move them to Babylon. And they took them out in 3 waves. If you remember, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all those were taken out in wave 1. And so in wave 1, they took out the top aides, if you will. It's like if someone came to the United States and decided to take it over, but said, okay, if I just take this country over, people are going to do the same old thing every day. I'm going to have to bring these people to our land. So, I don't know, pick a country, Iran, or something like that. And so they'd move us to Iran from the United States, and if they did it like this, they would take the leaders, congressmen, senators, some of them they probably said they have them, but, all those types of people, they would take the leadership first. Because in everybody's mind, it's the strong and mighty. So they took them in the first wave, and then 2 other waves. Then in 586 BC, that city was destroyed. As soon as possible, they rebuilt it. For 1,000 years, Jerusalem had been the center of religious, social, and political life for the Jewish people. So imagine that. 1,000 years. Political, religious, and social. Basically, that covers almost every area of life, and so that was all in Jerusalem. That was the city. So, because of its constant rebellion against God, Jesus announced that his days as God's holy city were numbered. Now, Luke devoted as much space to Paul's last few days in Jerusalem as he did to any of the missionary journeys, in spite of the fact that no new churches were established. So I want you to kind of think of this, because pretty much the rest of the book of Acts is kind of devoted to Paul's last part of this missionary journey. And not one single church is started. You think, well, missionary journey, Paul went and he started all these churches, and he did in the first and the second and the first part of the third missionary journey. But this last part of the third missionary journey, Luke just puts all this emphasis on it when he writes the book of Acts. And so there's some importance here because of the situation, because this was at one point the city of God, and different things. So we see a couple people have some comments. George E. Ladd says this: Luke devotes considerable space to the record of Paul's last visit to Jerusalem, not because the visit was important in itself, but because it showed the final rejection of the gospel by Jerusalem. That's interesting, isn't it? The final rejection. They had Jesus, they've had the apostles. If you remember, the apostles were based out of that area. That was their home base. And they rejected the apostles. And then Paul comes, apostle born out of due time, and they reject him. How many times can you reject the gospel of Jesus Christ? So Lard, how do you say his name, comments on that. Now, Bobby Duncan says this. He says, one of the purpose was to show people that God was through with Judaism, and that the Jewish nation, as a nation, was through with God. The things we see here alone would vindicate God in bringing upon Jerusalem the awful destruction foretold by the Lord in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. The Jews were filled up the measure of their fathers, and demonstrating that they were the children of them who had killed the prophets. And he refers to Matthew 23, 31 and following for killing the prophets. So basically what he says is this: Luke spending so much time on this text is showing that, God is just done with them. And that leads us to ask some questions. Well, is there a point where we walk away from people because they reject Jesus Christ? Or do we just keep going and going and going and going? I think there's somewhat an answer probably in the middle to that, where we don't always walk, we can give them some space and give them some distance, but always be willing to share the gospel with them. But if I'm overcrowding them and they're rejecting me, well, then I definitely have to get back and give them some space, but I'm always hopeful, knowing that there will come a day when there is no hope. Finally, Warren Wiersbe says this. He says, the people of the nation had already been involved in 3 murders. So basically, the citizens of Jerusalem had already been involved in 3 murders. I want you to think about this for a second. He goes on to say, they would have committed a 4th had not God delivered Paul through the intervention of the Roman guard. Israel was now set aside. Its period of probation was over. And so it's interesting there that he brings up the Roman guard that is going to, they're going to arrest Paul. They're going to put him under what we call house arrest, where he can still do things. He's going to write letters to 3 different churches that we have today. A couple of the ones we think of that we talk about a lot are the letter to the church of Philippi, the book of Philippians. He wrote that when he's in chains, when he's bound, when he's in prison. Another one was Ephesians. And so we have these 3 different letters. So the Bible teaches that Jehovah is a patient God, but there's a limit to his patience. He will tolerate disobedience only so long. And then it says that's enough. Go no further. In this chapter, we'll see some of the final events that made God say that's enough to the city of Jerusalem. So let's begin with chapter 23. Paul looked intently at the council. Now it's interesting because this is the Sanhedrin council that he is now involved with and looking at. And Paul sat on the other side of the room at one point in his life. Paul was a member of this council. Years had gone by, about 20 years had gone by this time since he sat on the other side of the room. Many of them were probably gone, dead, whatever. Some new faces, things like that. But now he's on the other side of the table. So It's kind of like sitting on both sides of the table. So it's a different view. When you're trying somebody, when you're asking them questions, that's one point of view. But when you're defending yourself, that's certainly another point of view. So now he looks at him, and notice the word there, intently. What's that mean? When you look at somebody intently. Or somebody else have another word there? Verse 1. Acts 23. Yeah. No, it's 23 comes after 22. Earnestly. Yeah. It's intently, earnestly. In other words, he's just giving them the stare. He's probably in a little bit of pain. They haven't been nice to him. Probably tired. If he's like me or you, he might be grouchy at this point. And he gives them the stare. And to know Paul's character, I think that he's thinking, I'm not Paul, but I think he's thinking, what's the worst you can do? Kill me. Go right ahead. That's the worst that can happen here, because if you kill me, I know I'm good with God. Now, he writes Philippians not too long after this. In the book of Philippians, in chapter 1, he talks about that. He says, I'm perplexed between the two. To go and be with the Lord, or to stay here with you. And you need me. I know you need me, so I'll stay here with you. But he's thinking, that's in his mind. I can go with me and the Lord at any point in time. So he's looking intently at the council and said, Brethren, I have lived my life perfectly good conscience before God up to this day. In other words, looking this up, what that really means is he has not been a criminal. He hasn't violated any crimes anywhere. He's never been, or he has, type in his driver's license, nothing comes up. No tickets, no arrest, no trouble, no anything. I'm in good conscience. I haven't done anything wrong. I obeyed the law. The high priest Ananias commanded those standing beside him to strike him on the mouth. So here's Ananias, the high priest. Now, this high priest Ananias is not to be confused. There's some others mentioned. Let's see where they're mentioned. There's one in John 18:22, one in Acts 4:6, one in Acts 5:11, one in 9:10. It's those names are kind of like that, but it's not to be confused with them. This is the high priest at this particular time period, Ananias. And God, can you imagine that coming before the judge? Okay, here we go before the judge. You give him that look. You say, I haven't done anything wrong, Your Honor. I have a good conscience. I haven't done anything wrong. Strike him. That's what they did. Strike him on the mouth. That's why I say Paul's probably feeling a little bit of pain at this point, because he's not handled well when he, from the point he was arrested until he got to this point, he's kind of dragged here and dragged there and lifted up to get up the stairs. And if you look at the picture, there's a stairwell in the back there. It's at the back of the court of the Gentiles, and that's the only way up to this area. And so he was, they had to drag him up the stairs, and so he's probably hurting a little bit. They smack him on the mouth. Verse 3, then Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit to try me according to the law? In violation of the law, order me to be struck? So we have this whitewashed wall, going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. We have to think about that. What exactly is that? And this goes back to a couple different places. First of all, the law was clear that no one was to be punished until he had been tried and found guilty. It's Old Testament law, Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 15. Leviticus 19 and 15 and Deuteronomy 25 verses 1 through 2. So it's Old Testament law. You cannot be punished unless you are found guilty. Now there's more to that law. That there has to be how many witnesses? At least 2 witnesses. So there's more to that law than that, but that's the bare minimum. And so even the oral law said, he who strikes the cheek of an Israelite strikes, as it were, the glory of God. And so that's from Ibid. So there's a oral law. An oral law that's probably handed down from Josephus or someone. In other words, that's the law that was just kind of understood, oral agreement, that if you're striking the cheek of an Israelite, it's like striking the cheek of God. Remember, this is the city of God. And so they all knew that and kind of thought about that. Now, Hebrews chapter 5, verses 1 through 2 tells how this should have gone down. Hebrews chapter 5 says, "For every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness." So how do you think that, according to Hebrews 5, how do you think they should have dealt with this? There's a word there. It starts with a G. Gently. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. We haven't really got to it, and we will, but what really, without coming out and saying it, what is really Paul on trial here for? Besides not liking Paul, what's he really on trial for? His beliefs. He's on trial for his beliefs. Now, we live in a world, or I should say a country, that will let us believe what? Anything we so choose. Is that not true? Religiously. There are people, I don't think there's any in West Virginia, or probably not in Ohio, but I know there are people on the West Coast that will have a building much similar to ours, and they'll worship Satan. It's just what they do. I think they probably still have the same tax advantage that we have, because they're considered a religion. You can worship your God how you want, where you want, when you want. This country was founded on those principles. So we're right now, anyway, it's a good situation. I don't know what the future will hold, but right now it's a good situation. Well, Paul is really on trial because he changed his beliefs and tried to share his beliefs. And they don't want to hear none of that at all. So now this whitewash, Paul's reference to a whitewashed wall was familiar to his audience, not as much familiar to us. The prophet Ezekiel had compared false prophets to crumbling walls that had been whitewashed to cover their flaws. So it's kind of the idea of a wall that this wall is fine, it's got a little dirt there, but my hands are clean. But it's kind of the idea of a wall was crumbling. You could see the cracks in the wall and everything like that. And so you would paint it or wash it white so that it would be disguised, so you wouldn't be unable to see what's really there, the cracks and things like that. And so this comes from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 13, verses 10 through 16. And so Paul accused his Torah tormentors of this hypocrisy, his statement is compared to Jesus. Now, if you remember, Jesus called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear to be beautiful, but inside are full of dead man's bones in Matthew 23 and verse 27. So, kind of like outside is what? He was talking about a tomb, wasn't he? Outside of the tomb could look very nice and beautiful, but inside, open it out for 10 years, what are you going to get? A little bit better now because we have preservatives. Back then they didn't have, well, they had some, but still, dead man's bones. And so it's appearance. What we're talking about here is an appearance. What is the appearance of this council that I want you to know is a mixed Pharisee and Sadducee council? It's not a council of just one or the other. It's mixed. There's a Jewish council called the Sanhedrin, but there's both Sadducees and Pharisees on it, which is going to create a bit of a difficulty in a few moments. And so what is, in other words, they're pretending to be what? What do people pretend to do sometimes religiously?
Pretend to be holy.
Pretend to be holy. Pretend to be right with God. And sometimes that's not the case. They're pretending to be all holy and we're doing this for the cause of God. Well, are they? It doesn't appear to be, but that's what Paul is accusing them of there. Of course, he reviews the law with in verse 4. He says, but the bystander says, remember there's always bystanders, do you revile God, high priest? And Paul said, I was not aware, brethren, that he was high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So verses 4 and 5, the assembly was kind of shocked at Paul's pointed words, do not revile God's high priest. They asked Paul was taken back and says he wasn't aware. Now this, you shall not speak of evil of a ruler of your people. It's a quotation from Exodus chapter 22, verse 28. More of Paul's demonstrated that instead of speaking against the law, he had respect for the law. So, Paul is trying to state that he has respect for the law, and he does. I doubt that very many people on this council know the law better than Paul does. So certainly he has respect for it. So it's kind of like, me going to argue a case with the Supreme Court, and, they're going to know more about the law than I do. Okay? Well, Paul probably knows more about the law than the Sanhedrin at this point. Verse 6, but perceiving that one group were Sadducees and the other group Pharisees, Paul began crying out in the council, brethren, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisee. I am on trial for the hope and the resurrection of the dead. He might as well just stuck a firecracker in the middle of the room and let it go off. Because people are going to what? They're going to get an uproar. Why do you think they're going to get an uproar? What did he say that was wrong? Resurrection. Pharisees are good with the resurrection. They believed in the resurrection. They stood firm on the resurrection. Not the resurrection of Jesus, mind you, but the idea of a resurrection from the dead. What about the Sadducees? They didn't believe it. That's why they were sad, you see, because they didn't believe in the resurrection. They believed when you died, well, that's it. So now, instead of a group going against Paul, he's got them kind of crossfiring at each other. Verse 7, as he said this, there occurred a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor an angel, nor a spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So we'll stop there for today. It's interesting. So they points out here that they don't even believe in angels or spirits, but obviously the Pharisees do. So you're going to see this crossfire there. Then there's going to be a conspiracy to kill Paul and things like that, and we'll see what happened. Paul will be moved to Caesarea at some point and put under arrest there in Caesarea. We'll pick up there next week. Good to see everyone. Certainly glad you're out tonight with us at our Bible study, our Raymond Bible study. A few updates on our announcements. Paul Lemon has finally got his appointment in Morgantown. It will be September 17th, so he'll go up there for his hearing, and hopefully they'll be able to give him some answers then. He's also taking therapy 2 times a week, so keep Paul and Ruth in your prayers. Remember Stacy Robinson? He has a staph infection, and if you notice he has cotton in his ear. He possibly has damage to his eardrum and some possible hearing loss. So I think there might be doing some more testing on that. So keep Stacy in your prayers, if you will. Rhonda's co-worker Carrie Smith has breast cancer. Karen Metz's niece's husband has COVID, and her nephew has Bell's palsy. Angie White's great aunt she is now home, so we've been praying for her, but she has still has a blockage, so keep her in your prayers. Any new information on her?
They wouldn't do surgery and she didn't want to.
Okay, so they won't do surgery and she didn't want to. So, okay. Kathy Julie is a friend of the Robinsons. She has stage 3 cancer, and it's inoperable. So she's going to have some radiation and chemo if necessary. Any update on her?
She, they told her again, radiation is starting to shrink it. So
Okay, that's good.
hopefully it keeps shrinking.
Good. And remember Christina's mother. She is back at Eagle Point. Still in need of your prayers. Diane Knox scan shows some significant improvement. Her body is responding to her treatments that she's been having. Charlotte Eckert did type up her thing. What was the update on her, Connie?
She had a little Monday, but she hadn't heard from me yet.
Okay, so both worked Monday that she's waiting to hear, and she still doesn't have an appetite, I think. Chris Enoch had his kidney transplant and is looking good. He is now home, doing well. Saw a picture of him today, I guess it was, and it was looking good. So remember Paul Mullins. Paul Mullins is Chris Mullen's father, and he has stage 3 cancer. Chris is a member of Camden Avenue, and he used to be the youth minister of 36th Street, so many people know him. Is there anybody else on our prayer list that we need to remember?
I talked with my sister today, and she's been going to doctors for weeks. She's been having seizures, and she's got some other health concerns, so they're working with different medications to see if they can get this under control. I'd like to put her on the prayer list. Her name is Susan Mosier. She lives in Jackson, North Florida.
Susan Mosier?
Mosier.
Anybody else? And my sister has a heart cath coming up soon. They don't know the date yet, and then the next thing is her name. She's been having her blood pressure is going up and going down. 1 minute can be 213 over something, the next minute can be 113. So she's going to have a heart cath soon, hopefully. Anybody else? There is a bridal shower this Saturday at 6:30 here at the building. That is for Allie. She will be getting married relatively soon, October. So make sure you bring a gift. That's for ladies. I'm told that's for ladies only. So guys, we're just out on the cold. That's okay.
Y'all can do the cleanup.
Oh yeah, sure. You won't be seeing too many guys around, I don't think. And Sunday evening, we have a men's business meeting after worship. We encourage all the men to stay for that. And ladies, if you have something, give it to your man. If your man is not here, you can give it to me or someone else. And we'll make sure I'll make sure it's mentioned, or they'll make sure it's mentioned. And then September 3rd is Ladies' Night Out at Western System. I was reading through the parable of the different parables this afternoon, and I came to the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 14. So I want to share that parable with you. Jesus says this, "For it is just like a man about to go on a journey, who calls his own slaves and entrusts his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1, each according to his own ability, and he went on his journey. Immediately the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who received the 1 talent went away, dug a hole in the ground, and hid the master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. The one who had received 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, 'Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I've gained 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Also, the one who had received 2 talents came up and said, 'Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents.' His master said, 'Well done, my good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' One who also had received 1 talent came up and said, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. And I was afraid. I went away. I hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours.' But his master answered and said to him, 'You wicked, lazy slave. You knew that I reaped where I did not sow and gathered where I scattered no seed. You ought to have put money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. Therefore take away the talent from him, give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has more shall be given, and he will have an abundance, but from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness. in a place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I find this to be an interesting parable because it's talking about, well, what we would call talents, or you could say talents of ability, or you could say talents in the form of currency. But whichever way you look at that, I always look at this and use that word talents, because I think it really has more to do with our ability. Sometimes we don't think we have very many talents. We may think, well, I don't have any skills, I don't have any talents, I don't have much ability at all, and so I'm just not going to do much. And I'll be satisfied with that, and God will be satisfied with that. But I think Jesus tells a different story here, and it's interesting for the man that receives 5, that he's excited when the slave master comes back. And a man who receives 2 is excited when the slave master comes back. But the man who receives none and digs a hole and buries the one and unburies it when the master comes back and is ready to present it to the master is not excited when the master comes back. And I just find that to be interesting. So I think what we need to take from this is that God gives us so many abilities. Sometimes maybe more than we understand or know. I don't know if I can swim, to be honest with you. I'd like to think that I could swim if I had to. If I'm on a boat and it begins to sink, and I like to think that I can jump out into the body of water, and I've watched people swim. I know the motions. I know how it goes. I'd like to think I could hold my breath while my head goes underwater, but I don't know that I know that. This morning, Ann asked me, she goes, they're giving swimming lessons at the Y. Would you like to take some? I said, no. But then thinking about, I'm still not sure I'm going to take them, but thinking about these talents, sometimes we have to step out into areas for God, don't we? That might be make us a little nervous at times. But as we do it, it seems to be all right. I like the reward, if you will. And I'll tell you why I like this reward. When I was young, I didn't know where this passage came from. But my dad we'd read the Bible at night. My dad would have a prayer. This was before we'd go to bed every night. And in his prayer, he would say, and when we're done with this lifetime, let us hear. And he would quote this verse. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter in. You are faithful over a few things, I'll put you in charge of many. Enter into the joys of your master. Pray to God that when we're done with this lifetime, we hear that. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joys of your master. And I think for all of us, that's a prayer that we want to do. We want to hear that from our Master on that great day. We sing the song, there's a great day coming. We look forward to that great day, that day when God welcomes us home. But I think as we're Christians, we realize we have a task to do. First on that task is to worship God and save souls. Tonight, if you're not yet a Christian, why not? To hear that phrase, well done, you have to be a child of God. To hear that phrase, well done, you have to be right with God. So you need to respond. Once you come, so stand as we sing.
God is calling the prodigal, come without delay. Hear, oh, hear him call, presence come today. Hear his loving voice calling still, calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come, calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come, patient, loving, and tenderly still the Father pleads. Hear, oh, hear him calling, calling now for thee. Oh, return while the Spirit in mercy intercedes. Hear his loving voice calling still, calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come, calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come. Come, there's bread in the house of thy Father, and to spare. Hear, oh, hear him calling, calling now for thee. Lo, the table is spread and the feast is waiting there. Hear his loving voice calling still, calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come, calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come.
Sorry about that. My throat's still not the best. Well, I want to thank you all for coming out to tonight's evening Bible study. And without further ado, I'll lead us in a closing prayer. Father in heaven, holy is your name. Father, thank you once again for letting us have this opportunity to learn. Be with us as we go our individual ways, and that we might stay safe. And it's in your Son's gracious name we pray. Amen. Couldn't think of anything else I didn't pray for already.